society and culture that doesn't always celebrate those things, but we are here celebrating that tonight. And I will tell you that I've had the opportunity to work with and get to know these 5 people that you will meet momentarily. And it's been amazing, an amazing experience for me to hear their stories, to share in those moments with them, and to, in some way, help them to clarify their stories, if I can help in any way. But you're going to hear a lot of special things tonight. You're going to hear things that you might imagine that some might be painful. But I think that what you'll also hear are stories that have hope and that they move you, and you're going to feel something tonight. There's no doubt about that. And so, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first storyteller. And our first storyteller is Raymond Velazquez, who is a harm reduction coordinator out of Asheville, North Carolina. And even though I just introed him as Raymond Velazquez, he has said that when he hears Raymond, it's usually when he's in trouble. So he's not in trouble. We're celebrating him. Ray Velazquez.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff, so much. I really appreciate it. Let's see. There you go. All right. Just wanted to make sure I was. All right. Perfect. All right. Thank you, Jeff, once again. Most people consider Orlando, Florida, where I'm from, a place of magic. In my story, in my case, it wasn't always the same for myself. I remember when I was 7 years old and I was watching Wizard of Oz for the very first time quietly because it was past my bedtime. So I was trying to keep the volume down until I was interrupted with sounds of yelling and commotion coming down the hall in the bathroom. As I ran out of the bedroom, I saw my mother on the floor with her best friend frantically on the phone down the hall with 911 on the phone. It wouldn't be the first time that I would witness her or experience an overdose myself. My mother survived this time, and after experiencing 3 more times in front of me, she later transitioned in 2009 to cancer. I spent the next 2 years of my life a little lost, involved in the night scene. Drugs and alcohol and sex work were mostly what I enjoyed. I was trying to discover and find things that I wasn't really missing. I did this cycle continuing this cycle for about 7 years. It was until one night, it was about 5 days, it was like the Sunday before Thanksgiving. I was supposed to meet some friends for a Friendsgiving event, and then a friend had called me to one of the local hotels, and the next thing I know, after a 6-day binge of mess, I woke up in a different hotel that I wasn't in originally, and I was done. I was ready to make a change. I continued to stay in Orlando for the next couple of years, still battling the addiction or in running in the same circles that I continued to operate in. So I decided about 2 months ago, or last February, I apologize, that it was time to move. So I moved in February to Asheville from Orlando. Little did I know, 2 weeks later, stay-at-home response to COVID-19 took effect. So here I am away in a new city, trying to better myself and make some changes. And then I found myself at home. I took the opportunity to reconnect with family that I have been missing in my life for over 16 years, and it was much needed time. One day I saw that there was a need for blood donations. There was a decrease in donations for blood drives, because of COVID. So I was like, I'm just going to go ahead and donate. I'm sitting in the house doing nothing. So I might as well just go do something. So I go out there, and then about 2 weeks later, I missed a certified letter in the mail. So I had to go to the post office. So I figured it was just like a gift card or something that they were sending me for donating blood. So I went with my sister to the post office. I go into the car and I read the letter, and it stated that they have detected HIV antibodies in my blood, and that I should go get confirmatory testing, and that they notified North Carolina and South Carolina Health Department. In the moment, I thought I was okay. I had friends that were living with HIV for many years, and it wasn't something that I wasn't familiar with. I'm like, I'll be okay. Listen, I knew I wasn't okay. I attempted to drive off from the post office, and I had my sister in the car, and I experienced a panic attack, and I blamed it on the Chinese food that I had ate that afternoon for lunch with my sister, but I just wasn't ready to talk about it. I spent the next few days at home, depressed in my mind, in my thoughts, and not sure of what I should do. I finally got to a point where I could no longer hold it in, so I spoke to my sister and I confessed to her what happened that day. Immediately, she helped me look for resources, and then I stumbled upon the Western North Carolina AIDS Project. I then was connected to treatment right away, and got a medication regimen. And then a few months later, I was undetectable and the healthiest I've ever been in my whole life. And later that summer, a position opened up at WNCAP for the Western North Carolina AIDS Project for a community navigator. I applied and I got the position. A year later, I am now the harm reduction coordinator for WNCAP and serving a population of people that was just like me. And I wishing those resources were available to me when I was going through my struggles with addiction, as well as my mother. But being part of something greater in an organization like this that I work for, is any syringe service program or any harm reduction program, it saves lives. It's more than just the supplies that are handed out. It's the conversation and the interactions and the bonds that we build with people every day. With that said, it has truly been a full circle for me in the past year. I never thought I would be doing this kind of work, and not sure if you believe in a higher purpose or being. But for me, everything I've been through was not just by chance, and everything happens for a reason. I know every day my mother is with me, and I take comfort in knowing that she is there and will forever be there with me on my journey. From the scared little boy just trying to watch Wizard of Oz to the man I have become now. My name is Raymond Velazquez, and thank you for listening to my story.
Well, thank you, Colin. Thank you very much. We get to watch Colin for a while. Okay, so am I on the screen now, or is Colin? I mean Raymond. Raymond's still on the screen, not Colin. Sorry. Thank you very much, Colin.
Yeah, that was an amazing. I was getting a little choked up there. That was absolutely an amazing story, Ray. I found a lot of corollaries between things that I've been to, so I'm really looking forward to catching up at some point. And it's amazing how these stories, it just through learning these little tidbits of information about each other, some of us that are just getting to know each other or have only met through Zoom, it's like all of a sudden, we have these touch points that can really bring us together. Very, very poignant, very beautiful. So thank you so much for sharing your story, Raymond. It was very, very touching. And like I said, I've definitely got some corollaries there that I'd love to talk to you on a more personal basis about in the future.
Yeah, and Colin, it's great that you brought that up because one of the things that I always work on with storytellers is I try to help them to, do a few things that will help draw their listener in. One is, you want to be engaging, you want to tell a good story. The other is you want to help, you want to be relatable. You want to help your audience to see themselves in that story, whether or not we've been through the same experiences as Ray, we can feel him so profoundly. It's impossible not to feel his vulnerability, the fear, the panic, the desire to start new, and the desire to live a healthy life helping others. It's incredible, and I think that it's wonderful that he was able to capture that in his story. So thank you, Raymond, for that. You're not in trouble. I called you Raymond. I also called you Colin a few minutes ago because I was like expecting to see Colin. So sorry about that. Anyway, okay, so perhaps we should move on to our next storyteller. Our next storyteller is Shirley Hart, who is a grateful grandmother. She's a lover of jazz, and she loves her work. And I guarantee that after you listen to her story, you're going to love her as well. Let's give it up for Shirley Hart.
Come on, can you see me? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jeff and Raymond. That was very touching. God don't make no mistakes. God do not make any mistakes. Be strong and don't cry. Those are the words that I heard my grandmother tell me when I was 9 years old. And that's when my mother died. God don't make no mistakes. Don't cry. She's in a better place. And then later on in life, at the age of 15 years old, I heard that same song again. God don't make no mistakes. Don't cry. This is when my grandfather died. And he's in a better place. And that is the first time that I had taken my first drink. After my grandfather's funeral, I was with my cousins and they introduced me to a can of beer, Country Club. When I first drank it, it was nasty, but later on I kept on drinking and I liked it to taste, but it also took the pain from thinking about my grandfather, nor my mother. So then after that, I got of age and I moved to New York. There, living in New York, I was introduced to cocaine. I worked every day, but I was still like the high of getting high and everything. And then one day my daughter came home from school and she says, Mommy, I have something like a mosquito or something in her neck. And I looked at it and then I took her to the hospital. And when we looked at it, it was a pellet, a drive-by. When she was coming home from school, she got hit in the neck. I didn't want to stay in New York anymore after that. So I moved to North Carolina. And coming to North Carolina, I saw this sign that says, welcome to North Carolina, respect the law. So I looked at that, I started laughing because, hey, I know they weren't talking about me. I know I wasn't in no trouble or nothing. So, I know who was all good on that deal. But I found out later, that they were talking to me. So one night I was in bed and I woke up and behind me, all behind my back was nothing but fire. And I jumped out of bed and went and got my 2 boys and pulled them out the back door. And then I went back and I got my other girls and tears slipped out of my hand. So I took Astra outside and then I headed back in to go get Tia, and the flames between the kitchen and the bedroom stopped me. So I ran around the house and I kept calling her and I bust my head through the window. And Tia and I talked and I says, Tia, come to the window, baby. And she was saying, Mommy, Mommy. And I was calling her and, with Tia and I, we talked until we couldn't talk no more. So then I looked up and I thought I saw someone go in the house to get her. So when I went on to the hospital, I stayed in the hospital for 15 days. And that 15 days, no one told me that Tia was dead until it was time for me to come home. And as I was coming home and I asked my dad and my sister, I says, when can I go see Tia? And that's when they told me she's dead. We already buried her. Right then and there, I was told, my grandmother flashback again, don't cry, be strong. She's in a better place. But it's hard that you have a child that you can't even cry for. So from that point on, I started using drugs again. I got in trouble with the probation officer and I violated, and I got sent to Mary Frances. And going to Mary Frances that day, soon as I walked in, these ladies walked up to me and say, welcome to Mary Frances. And I looked at them like they was crazy. I mean, hey, y'all locked up, you know, hey, what are you so happy about? So I sat there and I wouldn't talk to nobody. I just sat there in group. And one day in group, this young lady started telling my story and I had my head down and I looked up and I said, wow, she's telling my story. We connected, you know, somebody actually know how I'm feeling, you know. So then I had 10 months there and it was getting close to my time of getting out. And they told me that, my counselor told me that, Shirley, in order for you to get out of here, you got to look at Tia's funeral. I didn't want to do it at first, but I wanted to come home to be with my other kids. So as a group, we all looked at Tia's funeral. And looking at that, I was, wow, it was heartbreaking because I finally realized that my daughter was dead. I realized that my mother was gone. Everybody that I loved, I realized that they was actually gone and I could feel that feeling. I had feelings all over those walls. I was bouncing off the walls. I screamed. I cuddled up like a little baby and cried. And I cried. And it was all right though. Then recently, I just lost my nephew. And I made sure that everybody was okay and supportive everybody. And then that Monday, when I went to work, I sit down at my desk and I just broke down and went to crying. But this time I could feel. I could actually feel, and I know how it is to feel. So I learned when you're facing a loss and you're facing that excruciating pain, that you do not have to run to drugs. Instead, run towards accepting your feelings and healing. And that's what I had to do. I had to learn to accept my feelings, whatever it was, so that I can heal. Thank you all for listening.
Tia, that was an absolutely beautiful story. Deeply moving. As someone just said in the comments there, there's comments are just pouring in. If you're not seeing them, just, you know, giving you all sorts of support and thanks for telling that. And it's interesting to me that, you know, some of the times that what I heard from your story was that, you know, a lot of the times that we find our biggest growths are through or our biggest growth in our life is through those moments of the biggest pain. And often a lot of us find ways to, you know, or some sort of salve to treat that pain momentarily, but it's only momentarily. It's only pushing all that down the line or cramming it down somewhere, you know. And it's amazing how when you actually face it, and you know, this is what I was hearing from you, is that actually, you know, coming face to face with that pain and going through it and connecting with other people who have had similar situations or felt that similar or that same kind of pain, you know, can be such a better salve and a long lasting salve and a meaningful salve than the salve that we often find in alcohol or various drugs and substances, you know. And I've experienced that myself, you know, in my own life and in my own experiences. But thank you so much for telling that story, and just that was absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, thank you for those words, Colin, and thank you, Shirley, for your story as well. I mean, you know, it's incredible when, you know, somebody, I mean, if you really think about the story that Shirley just shared, it was a lifetime. I mean, that's what she covered. She covered from childhood until now, and she did it powerfully and meaningfully in 6 minutes. That is the power of a beautifully told story that she was connected to. Thank you, Shirley, for bringing that energy and that commitment and your life you're sharing with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. All right, so we are going to move on to our next storyteller. Show of hands, how many of you are feeling something, enjoying this? And by show of hands, I'm not going to see you, but I'm going to pretend that I'm looking at all of you. So awesome. Thank you. I see a digital hand go up right now. Okay, so our next storyteller is Lucas Vrbsky, who is a grateful husband, an appreciative father, and a proud grandfather. And by the way, when I found out that he was a grandfather, I was like, I mean, I wouldn't have said that you were a grandfather, but you look so youthful, Lucas. And you could be youthful and be a grandfather, obviously. But anyway, I'm going to step away, tell your story. Can't wait.
I've been a guest of a variety of institutions where the door only opens from the other side. I've spent a lot of time and energy chasing the hypnotic intensity of a feeling, and even more time pursuing a new way of life. I'd like to tell you a little bit of a few of the many people that have impacted me. Our lives have had different twists and turns, and I have to ask myself, is it just dumb luck that divides us? I met Tico when we were at a behavior modification school for juveniles. He was quiet, observant, a great artist, and pretty handy with his fists. When I had the privilege to attend college, I learned that Tico had the opportunity to get sentenced to 30 years of hard labor at Angola Farm, Louisiana State Penitentiary. He's missed the life of his daughter up until this point. After school, I had the opportunity to work as a counselor in a residential treatment center in a medium security prison. This is where I met LA. He had stopped shooting dope prior to his conviction and maintained his recovery and his innocence throughout 17 years on a wrongful conviction. For that whole time, he worked as a peer counselor and a GED tutor, mentoring and helping men in the change process. LA's sentence was eventually vacated. He was exonerated and received a settlement. He continued to work with other people in the change process. The day that he died from pancreatic cancer, his daughter was admitted to the ICU for health complications related to drug use. She has since had to relearn how to walk. The grief and loss of loved ones is often palpable. Enjoying a cup of coffee one morning with my friend Michael, I noticed that the spoon on the table had a particular angle to it. When I asked him about it, he said it was his daughter Ashley's spoon. Ashley was a bright and kind young woman who had the ability to make everyone in the room feel special. Michael told me that every morning he stirs his coffee with the long handle of the spoon until the bowl retains some warmth. Then he rubs the bowl across his lips and remembers when he tried to blow life into his dead daughter. This was the last spoon that Ashley cooked heroin on. The stigma and collateral consequences of a criminal conviction are real barriers to re-entry and reintegration. Mark was also a peer counselor at that residential treatment facility in the men's prison. When he was released from his state sentence, he tried to get his Social Security disability benefits reinstated and was denied. He had 2 appeals that were also denied. This was in spite of the fact that his hepatitis C had advanced to liver cancer, his T cell count had lowered, and his HIV had worsened. Mark died before he was able to get those benefits reinstated. If it wasn't for his mother's love and her ability to open her home, he would have been destitute on the streets like so many other brothers and sisters that I know. So again, I have to ask, is it just dumb luck and the wings of hope and a prayer that separates me from the acceptable casualties of the drug war? A deeper examination of the systemic inequities that produce such disparate outcomes is necessary. The foundation of our great nation is land grab, chattel slavery, genocide, and the erasure of culture and history. Largely due to my melanin deficiency and my family's ability to access resources, I was allowed the privilege and opportunity for treatment instead of incarceration. Race and social economic class produce disparate outcomes. Truth and reconciliation is a sequential process. We have to acknowledge our past as individuals and as a society if we are ever able to evolve and grow. We have to learn how to envision what a world would look like where equity and justice reign supreme. Rather than be worn down and burdened by the loss of so many loved ones, I allow these opportunities to fuel my engagement in community. My life as a harm reductionist is a testament to the contributions of those that I have lost along the way. Peace and blessings.
Lucas, that was amazing. Very, very, very well said. And I loved how, you used this opportunity to, it was definitely a story of yours and a story that you had to tell. But through that story, you were telling the story of these people who have had such a great influence and have shaped the way that you've looked at the world or changed the way that you've looked at the world over the years. And there's just not enough that I can say about the influence that you've had on my life as well, brother. So I mean, I think this thing really keeps going and going and going and getting passed down and down and down, through those that are still with us and those that are not still with us, which is a really beautiful thing. I've got a arm full covered with tattoos, of friends of mine that have faced similar consequences or fates through the so-called justice system, through drug use, so on and so forth. And those people are all still with us, and I think that that's a beautiful thing to convey. And that's really what I got from what you were saying. All those people are still with us.
Yeah. So it's, yeah, absolutely. It's such a privilege to be, educated through these stories by Lucas, by Shirley, by Ray, and by the stories that we're about to hear as well. But before we listen to a couple more stories, two of our final stories, I want to bring Nidhi back to say a few words.
Thanks, Beth. We wanted to give everyone just a moment to sort of take a breath, and I have been holding all my tears in, but I promise you by the end of the night there will probably be flooding my face. But wanted to take this opportunity to just give appreciation, of course, for our storytellers tonight, and also let everybody know about some advocacy and basically a need, an ask for help. So in North Carolina, we have 40 plus North Carolina Safer Syringe Initiative, or syringe exchange programs, or syringe access programs, or syringe service programs, whatever you want to call it. But they're basically points of connection for people in North Carolina. Syringe exchange programs are evidence-based, they're cost-effective, and they're really what people need when they're feeling sometimes at their lowest, and a way for them to connect with resources, connect with support, find an entry point to care if that's what they're looking for, and just be treated with dignity and respect, and respect for the shared humanity that we have. And so, unfortunately, last month, the North Carolina Senate filed a bill, Senate Bill 607, that would essentially decimate our North Carolina syringe exchange programs. This is very misguided, unfortunately, and we're hopeful that we can counter the bill with messages of support and hope for syringe service programs, and share with our legislators what good they're doing for us. We value and really just need our syringe service programs to be an extension of our public health workforce. They're essentially where we need to be and where we often have a hard time getting to. So I'm going to post in the chat a sign-on letter in opposition for Senate Bill 607. I'm hopeful that you all will take a minute, regardless of whether you live in North Carolina or not. This is just a general letter. And if you could please add your name to the list, we would really, really appreciate it. It would really help us make the case with our North Carolina legislators that we need syringe exchange programs in our state. Thank you for the extra moment.
Thank you, Nidhi, for that message. Very important. And I just want to give a shout out to you as well, that you're the catalyst that made this event happen. And, you talk about how you've talked about, oh, this has been a dream of mine to have, storytelling be a part of the North Carolina Opioid Summit, and it's happening. And, I can't think of a better way to utilize the telling of stories than in this forum. It's been a powerful evening thus far. And, thank you for bringing me in, including the Monti, and making this happen. Okay, so let me introduce our next storyteller to you. Diannee Carden is the founder of ECM for Change Syringe Service Program in Greenville, North Carolina. She has 3 awesome sons and 6 grandkids. Without further ado, let's welcome Diannee Carden.
Thank you, and thank you for the break. I'm really humbled by the stories that were told before me, so I needed a chance to get my breath. So it was October 2011, and I was really anxious because my son Michael was returning to New York. He just spent 10 days at home with me, recovering from his recent return to opiate use. I was thinking to myself that it was just too soon, and I really knew that he was not ready to go back yet. But he insisted that he needed to go back to his clients who were in a hepatitis treatment study because he said they were vulnerable. As I was folding his laundry for him to pack when he came up behind me, I heard him say, "Mom, I need your social security number before I leave. I need to make you the beneficiary of my life insurance policy." I took a deep breath before I turned around and looked at him standing there with that quirky smile he always had on his face, and asked him, "If something were to happen to you, what would you want me to do with the insurance money?" And we had this really surreal conversation as he told me to remember who he was, what he believed, what his dreams were, to provide a safe place for people who were like him, and to try to continue to advocate for the rights and the needs of people who use drugs with a history like he had, just as he had done in his professional life for more than 10 years. Later, I drove him to the airport, walked inside with him, and then watched him disappear up the escalator. He had a cup of coffee in one hand and that well-worn backpack slung across his shoulders. Now, my home is located below the path of the outbound planes going north. So I quickly drove home so that I could watch his plane as it flew over my house, headed to New York. I watched, and when I looked up and saw it, I blew him an air kiss because I knew that his return back to work was going to be really stressful. He'd be facing some really tough questions from his employer, and he was having to make some personal decisions about his recent at-home detox with me. I guess it was about 6 months later, it was April 9th, 2012, about 9 o'clock in the morning, that I found myself not knowing how I got on my knees on the floor with my phone in my hand. I was listening to a faraway, unfamiliar male voice telling me that Michael was in the emergency room. He said Michael had overdosed and that they were working on him. He also said it didn't look good. And then he told me to call back in an hour to check on his condition. I remember that I stayed in the same position on the floor, clutching the phone in my hand and waiting and waiting. And about 10 o'clock, a social worker told me that their efforts to save my son were unsuccessful, and he was gone. She asked me some questions so she could complete their paperwork, gave me a phone number to call to make further information, and then she hung up. In a fog and mostly on autopilot, I went through the motions of making the decisions to bring him back to North Carolina and lay him to rest just a mile from his childhood home. And after the flurry of activity was over and everyone who had come had returned to their own homes and their own lives, I began to create some kind of routine to my own. And that's when the cardinal appeared. You see, I work from home, and every morning as I started my day while sitting at my desk, this young male cardinal would land on my windowsill. Sometimes he would just sit there looking at me through the window pane for several minutes, and then he'd fly away. About 6 months later, I was asked to speak at the opening of the Harm Reduction Conference in Baltimore. I'd never spoken to a large group before, and I was scared to death. But it was a chance for me to let Michael's colleagues know how much he loved them and the work they did every day, and encourage them to continue to fight for the people who use drugs, even if it was one of their own. As I began to speak, I faltered and paused, and two young men, who I learned later were colleagues of my son, appeared from the crowd and stood on each side of me, physically and emotionally holding me up. Months later, I began to speak in North Carolina in support of new harm reduction legislation, and I told Michael's story of unconditional love for people who were just like him. North Carolina's Good Samaritan law happened to be signed on the first anniversary of Michael's death. After the news was announced to us, those of us who were waiting in the courtyard, that the governor had actually signed the bill, I drove back to Greenville alone. As I pulled into the yard, the male cardinal was waiting there on the porch rail as if to celebrate the significance of the event with me, so I would not be alone. Michael dedicated his professional life to providing services for people who were just like him. And I kept the promise I made to him that I would continue his work in an effort to bring about change in bridging the gap between people who use drugs, their health care, housing, treatment, and unemployment. ECHM, which is Mike spelled backwards for change, was born using the money that Michael left behind to help people who were like him with no judgment. I see Michael in the eyes of every person who walks through the door, whether they're seeking a change or just to be loved the way they are, especially if they have a well-worn backpack slung across one shoulder. That same male cardinal still visits me every day, sometimes on the windowsill, sometimes on the porch railing, and sometimes on the fence as I walk out to get the mail. His presence reminds me to continue the work for change. When I'm really tired, he reminds me that change is sometimes slow. And on the most frustrating days, I will look up from my work and often the cardinal is there. And I know that love is eternal. The appearance may change, but not the life, and not the energy, and not the power. And thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you so much, Diane, for your story. There was a comment that came through. Shauna May commented, I believe in cardinals being visitors from those we love in heaven. And I think that sort of narrative that sort of ran through the whole story, it just really that incredibly touching. And it's interesting because, you know, over the years in my own interactions with you, it's like I always sort of think of you as, you know, it reminds me of how my mom, you know, has felt over the years of, you know, living through and supporting me in my struggles with my substance use disorder. And it's just amazing that you've been able to continue the work, you know, and really carry on what he wanted. And it's almost as if, you know, he sort of had an understanding that this might happen, you know, and asked you, you know, I need your social security number in order to make sure that if something were to happen, that this work would be continued. And you've done an amazing job, because I've gotten to watch you, you know, over the years and be a colleague of yours over the years and watch you really continue the work in a way that really really encapsulates and I think it gives us all a wonderful example of how harm reduction work can really show people love and make that difference in people's lives, not through what we give people necessarily or the connections that we make for people to various forms of care or what they might need, but just through those interactions and through that through those, you know, those discussions that we have with people and just letting people know that they're loved and that they're respected and that there's nothing that makes them different from any one of us, you know, and that they are worthy of love and deserving of respect and love, as we all are. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you, Colin, for those comments. Like, I mean, I have to say that in addition to listening and connecting and engaging with these stories, I'm also really listening to Colin and your responses to the stories. I really love to hear your perspective on this. So thank you for sharing that as well. I also love the fact that there are much more connections in this group of people than I ever knew at the beginning. I was just handed a bunch of names and I'm like, oh, you guys will meet each other at this event on May 5th. But so many of you know each other and are connected to each other. And I'm watching in the chat how many people are calling out their affection for the storytellers. It's moving. It's moving, and I really appreciate this forum tonight. And that brings us to our final storyteller of tonight. And that is Ashley Wurth, who is a blossoming flower radiating compassion to all points of the compass. Let's give it up for Ashley Wurth.
That will forever be the best introduction I have ever received. So when my son was born, he fit perfectly on my torso. His head snuggled right between my breasts and his body reached from my chest to my belly button. And I gave him a name that literally means fire, partially because that name once belonged to a saint, but also because I was a teenager when he was born and Blaze sounded really cool. At 18 years old, I didn't know much about anything. I didn't know what it meant to be a mother. I didn't even know what it meant to have a mother. My own mother has been mentally ill my entire life. I grew up in an abusive household. I never knew what to expect. I always felt afraid. But I would sit in AP US history, listening to my high school teacher talk about the Vietnam War and watch my stomach move as my son turned and twisted and kicked. And I would feel this like life growing inside of me. And I would imagine that he was in there learning with me. I would hear his heartbeat at doctor's appointments and swear to myself, I am never going to break his heart. And when he was born and I held him for the very first time, I didn't understand how I could both love something so much and be so completely and totally terrified of it at the same time. And I tried. I mean, really, really, really tried to never break his heart. I tried to protect him and I tried to be anything other than my own mother. But growing up like I did creates fractures. It makes holes in a person. And from the age of 10 on, I filled those holes with alcohol and then prescription pills and marijuana and meth and heroin. And I wish I could say that my son and later my daughter were enough to fill those holes. And when they were born, even I expected them to be what could fill those holes. But that's a whole lot to put on a child. For a long time, drug use worked for me. I was able to be a good mother. I provided them with a home. I provided them with opportunities. We did Cub Scouts. We did Pee Wee basketball. I took parenting classes. I packed school snacks. I read bedtime stories. I did homework. We made crafts together. And I also snuck off to the bathroom to shoot dope. My kids were never dirty. They never saw syringes. The lights were always on. We always had food. The stereotypes didn't apply to us, but I knew that I was walking a fine line and that I was constantly teetering on the edge. I also had this divide, like this canyon inside of me. I had been told over and over again that people who used drugs were bad, and I believed that I was bad, and I was afraid to admit the truth of what I was doing. And because I was afraid, I couldn't ask for help. And my drug use worked until it didn't. And when it didn't, it really didn't work. My son says it was like someone suddenly flipped a switch. One day I was mom, and the next day I had checked out. Nothing more than a warm body. I was scattered. I couldn't pay attention. CPS got involved. My kids were separated from me and then from each other. My daughter went to live with her grandparents. The system served her. My son was sent to his biological father. He went into violence and more instability. My son literally went from one layer of hell into the next. Our system failed him. And I tried and failed at recovery. And during what would eventually be my final fall into a complete and total bottom, I was able to piece together enough stability to provide a place for his dad to at least drop him off. And on a weekend visit, I walked in on my son, who was 13 at the time, with his shirt off, and his arms were covered in cuts and scars. I recognized that he was doing the same things to hurt himself that I had done. And I realized that I had, in fact, broken his heart. And in that moment, this boy whose name means fire sparked within me the desire to do something different. I knew then that the only way he had even a half a chance at a life other than the one that I was barely surviving was for me to find another way to live. I made changes, small ones and then big ones. I went to treatment. I found a support system. I fought with no money and no resources, from homeless to just a little bit above homeless. And one tiny positive change at a time happened. People came into my life that I have no explanation other than some higher power bringing them there. And in early 2018, a lawyer friend of a friend listened to me and my story, and they helped me bring my son home. We immediately began the work of unpacking heartaches and breaks and resentment and anger, betrayal and dishonesty. When he came home to me, I asked him what he needed, and he told me to never lie to him again. And I haven't. Even when he has asked questions that are hard with answers that I am ashamed or embarrassed of. And today he is on the verge of 17. He's about a foot taller than I am. He no longer fits on my chest. And other than his sister, I have never loved anything or anyone as much. That's not to say that things are perfect and that he came home and we have this just beautiful existence and this happily ever after. My hair is turning gray. I'm navigating being a single mom of an almost man and an almost teenage girl. And sometimes we yell and I hate it, and we cry and I hate it. And I try to guide him and he tries to forgive me. But at the end of the day, I have become a safe space where my children know that they are loved and where they are able to fall apart.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely amazing, Ashley. That was, I mean, just such a testament to not only healing, but the discomfort that we deal with, and the fact that healing is not always a whole lot of fun, and it's painful, and it's sometimes funny in all the worst ways, you know, and it takes time, you know, and I don't know if it's ever complete. You know, that's one of the things that I've struggled with in my life, is like, when is this going to be over? Is there going to be some corner I turn, you know? And I don't know if there is, you know, but we get better at dealing with, you know, and coping with and navigating the difficulties and the struggles that continue to revisit us from our pasts, that continue to pop up in our present, you know. But thank you so much for telling that story. And I don't know you very well, so this really, it feels like it gave me a new insight into who you are as a person. And I really appreciate your candidness and just a beautiful story. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. And I mean, that was just an incredibly honest story. In fact, all of the stories were open and honest and revealing, and they gave us a gift. They created a moment, 5 moments that I certainly won't soon forget, and I doubt that others in attendance will. And so I'd like to acknowledge all of the people who have shared tonight, and that is Ray Velazquez, Shirley Hart, Lucas Vrbsky, Diannee Carden, and Ashley Wurth. I know everyone's applauding at home in their own way. The chat has been really quite intense to look at as the stories are being told. So I know that the stories are being felt in the way that they are meant to be felt.
Like, yeah, for panelists and folks that haven't had a chance, go back and scroll up through this stuff, because it's, yeah, some of y'all will, I mean, be brought to tears. There's just a litany of wonderful comments on there and insights.
Yeah, it's really nice. So anyway, it's been an honor. I've said this many times, it's an honor and a privilege to be a part of this forum tonight. And I'm, grateful to be here, and I'm going to pass it off to Nidhi, right?
Actually, Alyssa.
Alyssa, well, yeah. It's good to see you again, though.
Since I have a moment, I just want to say a heartfelt thank you so much. I told you I was going to cry by the end of it, so I love you, each of you. Thank you so much for everyone joining, and Alyssa, hope you can close this out.
Great, thank you. So one of the comments that just came in is, does this night have to end? And so I'm right there, because I can't believe it's already over, and I'm just so honored and grateful for everyone sharing their story. I laughed, I had goosebumps, I definitely cried, you know, just the themes of community and support and resources and love, and just, yeah, it was so powerful to hear from you all. And so I just wanted to close in saying that we raised just about $1,000 actually for syringe service programs and harm reduction programs like the ones that you heard about tonight. And I am going to just put a plug that it's not too late if you didn't get a chance to donate. There's an opportunity to actually register for this event, but donate so you don't have to. I mean, I wish we could come again, but this is the only time. But it's through the same link that you would register, where you can just donate. And we're going to be giving those funds to programs to be able to buy things like syringes and naloxone to be able to support people in the way that they need and meet them where they are and make any positive change, which you heard tonight is just such an important part of this work. So thank you all again to our storytellers. I'm in awe of you all and grateful that we get to work together. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here. So hope you have a great night, and I want to do this again soon. So thank you.